Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, no stranger to the Acton Institute. She's been involved with them for a long time. Founder and president of the Ruth Institute. I believe she has plenty of information about her absolutely fantastic organization. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that. But I was privileged to attend Acton University in Grand Rapids last summer. Heard Dr. Morse make almost sort of an incidental comment regarding the crisis in the home being kind of a precondition to what happened in the housing market, became enthralled by it and decided I had to have her speak. The clip fell off, so that's what, okay. So without further ado, please give a warm hand for our keynote speaker today, Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse.
Okay, David, would you like me to talk for an hour? Is that what you want me to do? You want me to talk till 3 o'clock? What do you have in mind?
I would like to talk however long you like, and 3 o'clock is the scheduled time.
Okay, cool. Okay, I'm set my timer here and everything, so I know what I'm doing. All right, well, thanks everyone for being here. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you about the financial crisis, the roots of the financial crisis. And I have just a couple of things to mention to you. We are giving out a little packet of information about the Ruth Institute. The mission of the Ruth Institute is to promote marriage, actually, believe it or not. It might seem like it's a little incongruous, but I'll show you what the connection is before we're done here. I hope you'll see the connection between marriage and the financial crisis. So we're going to be giving out little packets about that, about the Ruth Institute, and we're also circulating a sign-up sheet for anyone who'd like to receive the Ruth Institute's weekly electronic newsletter. So that's going around the table as well. Now, what I want to do in the time that I have with you is to sort of briefly say some things about the housing market per se, but then I want to talk with you about the family and its place in the free society in a more general way. Because I think this is a big neglected area of the whole kind of free market conservative movement, is that people don't have a good way of really thinking about the family and understanding the family. And so I'm basically going to do three things. I'm going to say a few things about the housing market. Then I'm going to talk to you about why people should care about the family, why, if you are passionate about the free market, you need to be passionate about the health of the family also, and try to show you the connection between the two. I assume all of you are passionate about the free market, or you wouldn't have come to David's event. Okay, so I want to help you see the connection between the family and the free market. And then finally, I want to give you kind of what I would think of as a kind of an outline of how to think through the place of the family in the bigger picture of the theory of the free society. You've heard previous speakers talk about Hayek. You've heard them talk about Adam Smith, maybe, talk about the Austrian school and so on. I think one of the problems that we're dealing with, one of the problems that we face, is we talk about the market and we talk about contracts because we know how, right? We know what a contract is, we know how to think about it, but we don't have a very good way or very developed way of thinking about the family. And so we have a tendency to think about the family as a special case of the market, or a special case of a contract, or a special case of the political system. We don't think about the family for what it is, which is the family. Instead, we think about it as a special case of something else. So that's the third thing that I'm going to do for you, is to try to give you just a brief outline, brief kind of overview of how to think about the family in a systematic way, rather than thinking about it as, oh, well, I have a mom and a dad, so I know all about the family. That's a little bit like thinking, well, gee, I have a checkbook, so I know all about economics. You know, there's something systematic that we bring to the table when we think about economics that's different from what we do as private individuals, and so that's where we want to head. So let me just say a couple of things about the family and its role in the housing crisis. You heard the previous speaker talk about how, in his opinion, part of the problem was not Wall Street, but Main Street. That is something that has happened in the hearts and souls, you might say, of ordinary Americans across the country. I think there are two ways that you can look at that, or two points that I would draw as part of that. The first, I think David Bahnsen was alluding to in his final remarks there, is that it used to be that people viewed their home as a home, that is a place to live, a place where you have shared memories, a place where the children come back to, a place that you might leave to the next generation, but it was a place to live. It was a focal point of the family's life together. That's what the house was. It wasn't just a house where you all happen to crash, not like a hotel or something, right? Where you all just happen to crash at the end of a workday, right? It's an actual home where it matters. The place itself matters. Instead, what we think is that the house is an investment, right? And so we buy the house kind of on speculation. Will we make money on this? There used to be, I don't know if you remember this, it seems like a lifetime ago, but there used to be bumper stickers that said, "My house is my retirement plan," right? Which was always a stupid retirement plan, right? But that's how people thought. So I think you can see it's a difference in the paradigm of what is this house? Is it an investment? If it's an investment, then you can speculate, right? And if you're a speculator, no, you lose once in a while if you're a speculator, right? And you shouldn't feel any worse for the housing market speculator than you feel for a guy who's speculating in pork belly futures, right? But if it's a home, then you feel terrible if you lose your home. And part of what is going on in the political rhetoric that we've been hearing about is a kind of going back and forth between those two views of what the family house actually is, right? We feel bad for people because we're thinking they've lost their home. But in fact, what they were doing was speculating. Right? And so we can't wrap our mind around that. And so what I want to just suggest is that one of the things that has been lost is a sense of the house as a home, as opposed to the house as an investment. And if you look at the grand scope of human history, if you just think about people and their relationship to where they live, the idea of the house as an investment is really, really weird in the grand scheme of history. That is not how people normally think of the place where they live. People have a lot of different relationships to the place where they live, but an investment, a speculation, no, not too common, right? So that is a kind of a way of commodifying something that's actually very human. If you think about the family home, it's supposed to make your heart sing a little bit, right? It's not supposed to be like an apartment or a retirement community or something like that. It's supposed to make your heart sing, right? So what we've done is commodify something that is turn something into an investment that should have something to do with the heart or something to do with the family or something to do with human connection. And that's been transformed. And so I think that's what we're thinking about. What have we done to ourselves by doing that? That's the first kind of short point I want to make directly about the housing market. The second thing I want to point out about the housing market and its relationship to the family is simply this. In the ordinary course of a family's life, let's think about you when you leave home for the first time and you enter the world on your own, right? First you rent an apartment, maybe you get married, the two of you save a bit of money, you and your spouse, you save some money and you buy your first home. Your first home is a little place, maybe you rent a run-down apartment when you're still graduate students, something like that. You start small. As you get married and accumulate a little bit of wealth, you get someplace a little bigger. You get some equity in that. You maybe trade up because now you've had your third child and you need your two-bedroom house isn't going to cut it anymore. You buy a bigger house. And then your children grow up. They leave home. And you think, well, I can't take care of this big house anymore. This is too much. We don't need a 6-bedroom house. The kids are all gone. Let's sell the house and move into something smaller. Well, all of that assumes that the whole society is growing, is continuing to develop. What is one of the most salient and unique things that has happened in the last 30 or 40 years is the decline in population, the decline in fertility, the bulge in the population associated with the baby boom, right? Think about that. Whole lot of people all of a sudden emerge out of their parents' womb and then attack the economy, right? The whole baby boom generation just sort of takes over the economy, and you can follow this kind of bulge of people going through the economy, right? And now they're all retiring, and everybody's trying to figure out how are we going to pay for retirement. Well, there's a housing portion to that question. How are we going to pay for the baby boomers' retirement? Good question. Here's another question. Who's going to buy the baby boomers' houses, right? When all the baby boomers have one child, 1.5 children, 2 children, something like that, who are they going to sell these houses to? There simply isn't the demand for that big midlife house, right? The biggest house that you are likely to own in your lifetime. They're all coming, they're all ready to retire at the same time. They need to sell those houses. Who are they going to sell them to? They didn't have enough kids to sell those houses to. So that is a part of the housing crisis, if you want to call it that. David Bahnsen made a suggestion of, well, why do we care if the housing market never goes back? I want to suggest to you that the housing market isn't ever going to go back. There simply aren't enough people to buy those houses. There's nothing we can do today to have more 40-year-olds tomorrow. That ship has sailed, okay? It just can't happen. So if you think about, just demography, this is a whole fascinating thing, and I don't want to do a whole talk about it, but I think one of the things we do talk about at the Ruth Institute sometimes is the demographic winter and the impact of the slowdown of population growth worldwide and what it's going to mean to us. But, if you look at, there's a guy called Harry Dent, and I don't want to, endorse his stuff particularly, but he made a very interesting comment in a movie that was called Demographic Winter. There are 2 movies about the demographic winter. I'm in one of them, and Harry Dent was in one of them. Anyway, Harry Dent is an investment advisor, and he made this comment. One day he's looking at a time series chart, looking at all of the, looking at stock prices for the last 70 years. Okay, and then he also happened to see, he had on his desk at the same time, the birth rate for the last 70 or 80 or 100 years. And he realized they were the same chart, just removed by 41 years. Why? Because the peak of your purchasing power, the peak of your consumer demand happens when you're about 40, right? So when you have a bunch of people who are 40, you have the stock market likes that, right? And when you don't have very many people, then the stock market doesn't like that as much. So I want to suggest that apart from all the monetary factors, apart from all of the policy flub-ups and so on and so forth that we could talk about, there's also a factor in the real economy here, which is simply the population size that's having an impact on the housing market, and there really isn't anything we can do about it. I mean, I just think we have to, take that one on the chin, or to use the phrase that was used in the last talk, we got to take our hangover, right? We have to take our hangover. In a certain sense, the baby boom generation did not do the one thing that would have been needful, which was to replace themselves, which was to pass on to them, to the next generation, what was handed on to us. How often does the Apostle Paul say that in his epistles? He says it at least twice. I hand on to you what was given to me. And that is the one thing needful that every Christian must do, is to pass on what was given to us. Well, if you don't replace yourself as a society, even biologically, you can hardly be claimed that you're doing that you're passing that on. So that's what I have to say that's directly and immediately about the housing market. I want to turn then now to the issue of why I think it's important that we should care about the family. That if you're passionate about the free market, you really need to be passionate about the family. Now, I should preface this by saying, I don't know if you read the little bio that they had of me, but my doctorate's actually in economics. Because I end up talking about the family all the time, people assume I'm in psychology or something, or I don't know what. But anyway, my doctorate's actually in economics. And I got interested in the subject of the family because of some things that happened to me. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened to me, because I promise I didn't learn any of this in economics graduate school. But I want to just give you the overall picture. I'm sure you know this. If you're at David's event, you're probably a person of faith, am I right? Okay, people are people of faith, and we know, and you're probably conservative to some degree. You probably call yourself a conservative with some adjective or other in front of that, right? So, right. Well, I want to just point out that a lot of times the fiscal conservatives don't get the point of the social conservative stuff, right? Is that a frustration to some of you? Yeah, it's a frustration to me too. A lot of times social conservatives vote reliably, very reliably vote for fiscal conservative issues, but the reverse isn't true. A lot of times it's very hard to get the fiscal conservatives to vote with us on stuff or to work with us on stuff. So I want to try to help you see why it's important. Maybe some of what I'm about to say will be helpful to you in talking to your fiscal conservative friends to help them get the point. Okay? So here's what approximately happened to me. In the 1980s, I was a hard-charging career woman. I had a doctorate in economics. I had first professorship at Yale University. I went on to teach at George Mason University, big free market mecca. It was then too, right? My plan for myself, because even though I was an econ PhD, I did still have a private life. You're not supposed to admit that, but I did have a private life. And my plan for myself is that I would get tenure at Mason. I would get pregnant during the summer. I was married. In those days, you had to be married before you would have a child. So I had that covered. I had that part covered. So my plan was I would get married, I would get pregnant during the summer, have my baby during the summer, and then put the baby in daycare in September and go right back to work and teach. You know, that was my plan. That's what all my colleagues did at George Mason. That's what everybody did in the 80s. You were supposed to get right back in the saddle and ride, kind of a thing. Well, imagine my surprise when the baby did not arrive during the month that I had set aside for it. Okay, now, you know, when I tell this story on campuses, a lot of times the girls will look at me like, yeah, and then what happened? You know, because that's their plan for themselves, too, see. They're still locked into this, you know, kind of way of thinking. So anyway, yeah, my husband and I were faced with a 4.5-year infertility crisis, which for me was a whole crisis of faith, which brought me back to the practice of my faith, which for me was the Roman Catholic faith. Because infertility was the first time in my adult life that I couldn't get what I wanted by trying harder. Okay, and because trying harder just doesn't work, the fertility thing. Any sensible old wife will explain that to you. You know, it doesn't work that way. So anyway, we resolved our infertility crisis in 1991 by adopting a little boy from a Romanian orphanage. We got a call from the adoption lady saying, we have a little boy for you. Now remember, 1991, this is the first batch of kids coming from Eastern Europe, okay? And the orphanage, the adoption agency lady, what are they called? Social worker. Social worker called me and said, we have a little boy for you. He'll be 2.5 when you get him. We know his name. We know his birth date. He's described as being good health. What do you say? We said, sure, why not? 10 days later, I went to the doctor with a head cold and found out I was pregnant. So we had 2 children in 6 months' time, which is a record even for a Catholic. So I kind of knew I was back in the practice of faith for sure then, you know. So anyway, so here we are with these 2 children in our home, 3 years apart in chronological age, but really emotionally very close in age, right? And as an economist, of course, nothing in my training prepared me for what I was about to deal with. My husband is an engineer, if possible, even less prepared. And so the 2 of us here, you've got to picture this, a pair of nerds, okay, let's be honest, a pair of nerds, you know, looking at this situation, and what do we see? We see a controlled experiment. Naturally. Naturally. And what is the controlled experiment? The controlled experiment is, what difference does it make whether you have a mom and a dad in your life? What difference does it make whether you have a mom and a dad in your life? And of course, it's huge. It's huge. Now, earlier, David Bahnsen referred to a situation where he said not a single lesson was learned. I think it was the Bear Stearns crisis. They had months to figure it out. Not a single thing was learned. I want to tell you something. We've learned something from the experience of these Eastern European adoptees. And by golly, the price we paid, the human cost of figuring out what this was all about is so high, we have to learn something from it. Because in fact, our little boy could not utter a single sound in any language at the age of 2.5. He didn't know his own name. Okay, those of you who are parents, think about that. He did not know his own name at the age of 2.5. So we're talking about very serious developmental delays, very serious things to deal with. And in the course of helping him and working with him, we became acquainted with other families who had children in similar situations, and we came to see that there was a common set of problems that all of these very neglected children had. And they centered on the ability to be social. They had centered on the ability to be social. Of course, talking is your primary social thing, right? It's a very, very basic social thing, being able to communicate with somebody else. Very basic social thing. But it ran deeper than that. And this was really the subject of my first book, Love and Economics, an unlikely combination of things. Because what we learned in dealing with these little guys, what all of us parents learned, was that when children are in the normal course of child development, when a child cries, somebody comes. Isn't that the most natural thing? When a child cries, somebody comes and does something for a little baby. Well, these little guys in the orphanage, they cried and nobody came. Nobody came, so they stopped crying. After a while, they stop crying. And they turn inward on the self and stop asking for help, stop looking for help, stop looking to other people, and they can't get to the point they can't even accept help in some cases, you see? So there are two very serious disorders, I suppose you could say, that could develop out of this situation. I want to emphasize one. There's one particular one I want to tell you about, and that's called attachment disorder. Now, attachment disorder comes about when a child never connects to another person. They never attach, they never connect. And what that means is that the child doesn't care what you think about them. They don't care. They'll just do whatever they can get away with. They cheat if they think they can get away with. They'll lie if they think they can get away with it. They're always checking to see what they can get away with. Okay? So I'm looking at that as an economist, and I'm thinking, that sounds like Homo economicus. Always calculating. Always checking it out to see what they can get away with. Always calculating their rational self-interest all the time. And I'm thinking, this can't work. This can't be what we meant to say about the human condition. That's got to be wrong. And so one of the things that happens with those guys, if they've really got it bad, and I don't want you to be freaked out over my little boy because he's now grown up and he doesn't really have it bad, okay? So I don't want you to be worried about that. But if they really get it bad, they can develop full-on reactive attachment disorder, which means they do not have a conscience. They do not have a conscience. Now, in the last talk, David was talking about the conscience. He didn't come right out and say that, but that's what he was talking about when he was talking about people making the strategic default decision. I actually owe this money, I legitimately owe this money, but hey, I can get away with it, so I'm going to walk away. Okay? That kind of thing. And the comment that was made in the boardroom, that if it had been 25% of the population doing that instead of 10%, we'd have been toast. There'd be no way to recover from that financial crisis, okay? So now, take that thought that David put in your mind, look to another arena, law-abidingness generally. Think about going into the store and shoplifting literally every time you thought you could get away with it. You could get away with it a lot. In fact, the society is counting on you not doing everything you can get away with. They're counting on you having a policeman up here that stops you from doing all the things that you could possibly get away with. And how does that work? Where does the conscience come from? You know, a lot of times as religious people, we think that conscience development means where we sit down and explain the Ten Commandments. Or, if we're really astute, we might realize that you have to go back to when they're even littler and say, when you're saying, don't do that to him, because he wouldn't like it if you wouldn't like it if he did that to you, you're starting the conscience development right there, right? At age 2. But I want to tell you that actually the development of the conscience is even deeper than that. Because the groundwork for the conscience is being laid in the pre-verbal, pre-rational stage, right here in your mother's arms. When you are being held by your mother, rocked by your mother, looked at by your mother, you believe she matters, and you believe you matter. And so when she puts you down, and you do something she doesn't like, and she looks at you like that, it matters to you that your mom's giving you a bad look across the room, which is, of course, what you want. You want that child, when they get up and start running around, you want them to stop doing what they're doing because you say something from across the room or because you look at them funny, right? Not because you run over there and grab them out of trouble. You've got an attachment disorder kid, you're running around getting them out of trouble all the time. You pick them up, you pull them out of trouble. Well, that's fine when they're 4. When they're 14, not as much. Right? You can't keep up with them, right? And so as they mature, if they've got full-on reactive attachment disorder, as they mature, of course, they're a problem. They're a big social problem. Their parents are scared of them. You think about that. Their parents are scared of them. Their family are scared of them. The state has to get involved to help control that kid. Therefore, I concluded as an economist that if we're going to have a free market society, if we're going to have a free society of any kind, you've got to have people who have a conscience. And if you've got to have people who have a conscience, that means you've got to have mommies. You've got to have somebody holding that baby. You've got to have somebody looking at that baby, preferably the kid's own mom, because nobody else is going to care like she's going to care, right? You'd have all those babies lined up in the cribs in Romania, and they all got fed. You know, they all got fed. They got their diapers changed twice a day, whether they needed it or not, you know. And it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough, okay? So that is the overall big picture reason why the free society needs the family, If you don't have mothers and fathers doing what only mothers and fathers can do, you're going to have a society full of sociopaths that cannot be controlled, and you certainly cannot have a free society with people like that running loose. People have to be able to use their freedom without bothering other people too much. That's the basic thing, right? It's not complicated when you think about it. You got to be able to use your freedom without being a problem to others, you know? And that happens in the family, inside the family. So that was the theme of Love and Economics. That's why I wrote that book, because I was just passionate about it, realizing that the economics profession was counting on moms and dads to get something done, and they were making absolutely no provision for getting it done. I don't know if you remember this old cartoon. There's a cartoon of two scientists in front of a chalkboard, and the chalkboard's filled with equations, and right in the middle of the chalkboard, it says, "Then a miracle happens." And one scientist says to the other, "I think we should be more explicit about step 2. You know, well, that's kind of how I feel about the family, right? Economists say, assume adults. Assume people who can keep contracts and respect other people's property rights. Hey, I got news for you. 2-year-olds don't respect property rights. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. But somehow, we've got to get people from infancy to adulthood. And it's the family that does that. And I would say to you that there's nobody else who can get that done besides the family. No other institution can get that done. If you think about the sexual revolutions of the past 50 years or so, what you will see is a celebration of alternative family forms, one after another. We celebrate this alternative family form and that alternative family form. And first it was, oh, divorce isn't so bad. And then it was, oh, single parenthood isn't so bad. And now it's, oh, gay parenting isn't so bad. And so on and so forth, okay? But what we already know is that none of those family forms have done the job. Those alternative family forms, none of them have done the job. And we could do a whole talk on that, which I won't do now, but I think you get the basic gist. So conscience development is absolutely fundamental thing that needs to get done. And when I wrote Love and Economics, I was really hoping that my free market libertarian friends would get the point. You know, I had a lot of those friends at George Mason, right? Those are my buddies. And it turned out they didn't get it. None of them got it. The only ones who got it were people who already had some kind of faith background. And it was very interesting because I started to find out who had a faith background, because they'd say, wow, I really liked Love and Economics, and by the way, I'm an Orthodox Jew, and which I wouldn't have known about that particular person, or whatever it was. You know, it didn't matter what their faith background was, just the fact that they had some connection with the divine and some connection with traditional morality allowed them to grasp what I was trying to say in Love and Economics. And the straight-on Ayn Rand, plain vanilla Austrian economics type of person, they just couldn't connect with it. They just couldn't get it. So, and that's still, 10 years later, still frustration to me that they didn't get it. So that's the second part of my talk now. In the third part of my talk, I want to give you just kind of what I think of as an outline, just a few basic points of how to think about the family on its own terms, rather than trying to think of it as a special case of something else. And if you want to take notes, I never do this, but today I just felt like there's a lot of small things I want to touch on lightly. So if you'd like to take notes, you could open up that blue folder we gave you and kind of right in the middle. You know, there's some blank space in there. I didn't think of giving you a little Ruth Institute notepad, which I should have. But anyway, if you want to take this down, that might be helpful. I usually try to just make a few points, but I want to make kind of more points, so you might want to write them down. So I have 8 in all. First thing I want to point out to you is that the people who have been attacking the family are in fact the same people who've been attacking the market. Do you all notice that? The people who attack the family are also the same people attacking the market. You would think that this would give your Ayn Rand libertarian free market person occasion to stop and think what they're talking about. Right? You would think that this would get their attention. But it's the same group of people. Now, why? Why? I want you to think about this. Again, you could do a whole lecture on this topic of why the same group of people. But let me just take it back to one basic point. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels knew from the beginning that the family was their enemy. They knew it from the beginning that this was their enemy. They knew religion was their enemy, they knew capitalism was their enemy, and they knew the family was their enemy. Now, in their mind, and Engels even has a book where he talks about this, The Origins of Private Property in the State, or something like that. I forget exactly what it is. Anyway, it's from the 19th century. And in that book, he actually says, In the family, the husband is the bourgeois and the wife is the proletariat. I mean, he literally uses the language of class warfare inside the home. And if you think about what the feminist movement did, starting with Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan and all those people, National Organization for Women, what were they doing? They were introducing the language of class warfare into the family, okay? Pitting men and women against one another inside the home. That's what they were doing. Now, why did Marx and Engels care about this so much? And why do their modern descendants care about it so much? Well, a number of reasons. If you want to, what Marx and Engels would say is that private property and monogamy arose together and are the same thing. And so if you really want to get rid of the capitalist system, what you have to do is get rid of monogamy. You have to get rid of the lifelong married love between the husband and the wife, where the husband is dominating. And you have to go back to communal property, group marriage, okay, where the children are held in common, right? And nobody cares who's the parent of the children. The children are held in common, and people have sex with whoever they have sex with. There's no sexual exclusivity. This is what they thought, okay? And if you I'm just going to let you think about that a little bit to see if you see people advocating policies that point towards that, point in that direction. And I think you'll see it tracks a lot of them pretty closely. Why the attack on the family? Because the family doesn't need the state. The family does not need the state. The family, let's think about it for a minute. A man and a wife, a man and a woman can come together and create the next generation without any coaxing from the state whatsoever. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but they can do it, right? And now they have a reason to be together. They've created their own little society there, right? And they really don't need the government. Right? They can just do it on their own. So if your idea is to centralize everything, if your idea is to control everything and everybody, this little thing going on over here independently in all the houses of America, you got to put a stop to that. Right? And so this is literally how they think. I have been told, and maybe Father Sirico can corroborate this, that when the communists took over countries in Eastern Europe, they wouldn't allow people to have dining room tables. They didn't want people sitting down and eating together. Now think about that. It was kind of crazy. So that's the first point, is that the same people who attack the market also attack the family. Second point I want to make. The idea of choice, that's a fraud. And choice is a fraud that is designed to smuggle into public acceptance practices and policies that could never be accepted any other way. Now, when I say choice, immediately, I suppose your mind goes to abortion, right? It's a woman's right to choose. Well, we're never too explicit about what she's choosing, right? Because if we got real explicit about what she's choosing, everyone would say, that's icky. We're not going to do that, right? So what's going on is we use the language of freedom and choice and autonomy to cover over the introduction of an alternative moral reality. That's really what's happening. It's not the case that there's going to get to be a Christian morality over here, and there's going to get to be hedonism over here. And everybody can coexist, and it'll be happy. You each get to choose what you want. Okay? No, that's not really how it is. Okay? What is really going on is that these are competing moral worldviews, and one will drive out the other. And the language of choice is being used as a kind of Trojan horse to get people to accept something that if they were explicit about what they were being sold, they would never buy it. You see what I mean? Okay, and so again, you can kind of go through a whole lot of issues that have that form. And in a sense, the Health and Human Services mandate and the whole controversy over that illustrates that this is true. Okay, Father Sirico alluded to the HHS mandate in this morning's talk. If you really think about what's going on there, is that the current administration is saying that we have our view of sexual morality, and we don't have to respect yours. In fact, we intend to drive yours out. If you're going to run an institution with your view of sexual morality, we're going to tax you, we're going to fine you, we're going to take over your stuff. That's basically what we're going to do. Okay, and let's be clear. What is their view? Their view is that pregnancy is an illness. It's a disease, which is completely crazy. I mean, it's not even medically, it doesn't even make any sense, right? Right? And so what are we trying to say here? What is that? What does that alternative moral universe look like? It looks like this. Sex is a normally sterile activity. Sex is normatively sterile. and it therefore is completely private. It has no social or moral significance. The only way sex can have no social or moral significance is if it's completely sterile. You've got to somehow get those babies out of the way. Because as soon as babies start showing up, it's plainly social and it's plainly moral, right? So you have to somehow sterilize the sexual act. And so that's not just a technological problem, that's a moral problem, all right? So all of you who have kind of quirky lifestyle preferences that make you want to have babies, we'll kind of allow you to do that on the side. But the basic thrust of this society is that sex is a sterile activity, okay? So that's a different moral universe. That's what we're dealing with here. And that's why these pesky bishops who keep saying things like, no, we don't want to do this, they have to be suppressed. They're a problem, okay? So now, the third point that I want to make is maybe a little bit more positive than these two things, and that is that if you want to do good public policy about the family, you need to not track the resources as much as you need to track relationships. So let me put it this way. A lot of times we think, well, we're going to do something to help children. What do? We transfer resources to children. We make sure they get their breakfast at school for free. Or we make sure their mothers get money for free so that children can be taken care of. The reigning paradigm of the family is that the family is an institution that transfers resource from big people to little people. That's all the family does. What the family does is transfer resources from grown-ups to children. And so therefore, if the grown-ups aren't giving out enough resources, well, we'll just have the government give out the resources and it'll all be good. See, that's what we're doing. When we say we're going to give everybody free breakfast, we're going to say, well, okay, we got to make sure these little kids get their breakfast. But if you think the business of the family is relationship, see, or building relationship, then you've got a whole different way of looking at the whole thing. Then you don't want to just say, well, let's give the kids breakfast. Then you want to say, well, are we doing something that's disrupting the relationship between the parent and the child? Are we disrupting the relationship between a parent and child? Are we undermining parental authority? Are we undermining parental investment in the child? Are we taking over the parent's job? Are we disrupting the relationship? If that's the case, it's cruddy public policy, even if you do get tons of resources to small children. See, that's the point. And so, again, if you start thinking back on many of the things that social conservatives have complained of, whether it be welfare or sex ed policies or no parental notification for abortion. There's a whole list of policies which, once you start thinking about them, you see that what we're doing is having the government take over the place of the relationship of the parent and actively undermining the relationship of the parent and thereby doing a lot of harm. So our paradigm needs to be, let's track the relationships, not the resources, okay? The fourth point is something I've said before, but I want to just emphasize it again, and it's to say that the family is not a special case of the market or of politics. The family is not like a little society that's where you have elections, for example, or where you have egalitarianism, or something like that, where you're trying to have equality in the household, right? Some of you probably remember how in the 80s, that's how we were all supposed to think, right? That a good marriage was one where everybody was equal. Husband and wife were equal. Right? So that's seeing the family as a political thing, right? Libertarians are just as bad in a way because they see it as a contract. I made a deal with my wife, and she does this, and I do that, and it's a contract, right? Those things don't work. We have to think of the family as something else on its own, and the family is principally held together, not with contract, not with political force or anything else. It's held together with love. The family should be held together with love. It's a new category, guys. I think some of you have heard of it before, though, right? Love, right? Is that okay if we have love in the society somewhere? We don't want love running the market. We don't want love running the politics, at least not directly. Wouldn't it be okay if we had love in the home? Well, you guys are supposed to laugh or something. I don't know. Okay, second, the next point, kind of a corollary to that, is the family is not a special case of the market. Family law should not be a special case of property and contracts. Now, you want to talk about a place where libertarians really go off the rails, okay? And where actually not just libertarians, but the lifestyle left, the whole lifestyle left is completely off the rails on this subject. Family law is not just a special case of property and contracts. So, why? Why? Because babies can't make contracts. Do we agree to that? Okay, babies cannot make contracts, number one. Number two, to make a contract over a baby is dehumanizing to the baby. It's to treat the baby as an object rather than as a person. So we don't want to use contract law here, right? We don't want to see the baby as property. We don't want to be selling babies. We don't want to be selling embryos. These are persons, not property, okay? So now, why do I say, I'll just say briefly, some examples of how this is driving people crazy. The people who want to expand the use of artificial reproductive technology in order to help same-sex couples. This is just one example, but actually the whole ART area is full of this kind of stuff. The model that they're coming up with is to, let's let the adults make whatever kind of contracts they want to figure out who's going to count as the parent. Right? So if you've got two women who want to be parents together, they have to somehow acquire sperm. You know, is a sperm donor going to be a person in the child's life, or is that person going to be excluded from the child's life? All these kind of questions, and it doesn't have to be a same-sex couple. People are doing this all across, in single individuals, married couples. People are doing it all across the board. If you start reading the news about this stuff, I guarantee you, you will be grossed out within a very few days. Because there's a lot of very spooky stuff going on, very strange permutations of things that are going on. But they all come down to this, to reduce the mother-father relationship to a contractual relationship, okay? Which is really not enough to sustain you through taking care of a child for a lifetime. There's a whole lot of stuff that's wrong with that. But I just want to, right now, again, I could do a whole talk on that, but right now I just want to point out, family law cannot and should not be a special case of property and contract. And if you find a libertarian starting to talk to you like that, go to my website right away, and there's plenty of articles there that will help you straighten that person out. Okay, the next point, I think I'm up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is number 6 out of 8. Okay. I think the way to think about family law is this. There is some way that it's like contract law, but it's not exactly contract law. I think the way to think about marriage and family law is this, that what the government should do with family law is to create a structure that allows people to solve their problems and get things done. The government shouldn't be micromanaging people, shouldn't be telling people what to do, but it should have a basic framework for you to say, I'm married to you, and therefore we have a certain set of obligations to one another. There's certain limitations on what we can do and not do. Now, that's comparable in a way to what the state does with contract law. Contract law doesn't tell you what to do, what to buy, what to sell, or anything like that. It just gives you a structure for if you want to deal with somebody, here's how it gets done. And you just stay within these parameters, and you can pretty much do whatever you want. You know, I buy, you sell. You know, we make a deal, we do what we say we're going to do, and, you know, we can do pretty much whatever we want. I think family law needs to perceive itself in that way, that what marriage law is doing is making it possible for people to have some structure, some basic framework to their lives, so that they don't have to figure it all out on their own, and so that you don't have to end up micromanaging it after the fact. Let me just give you an example of what I mean. Let's pretend we're in 1955. What would have been the basic structure of a person's life before the whole pre-sexual revolution? The basic rule would be you grow up and you get married and you have sex with the person you're married to and no one else. Well, how's that for a concept? You have sex with the person you're married to and no one else. And any children that you have are your responsibility, both of you together. You don't have the right to take the child and run away with the child. You don't have the right to run away from the child, right? The two of you together have that responsibility for taking care of the child, and no one else does. Your next door neighbor can't come over, grandma can't come over. That's your child and no one else's. You see what I mean? This is a basic structure, and you get married and you stay married, unless somebody does something really gross, right? But if somebody does something really gross, you've got provision for exceptional situations, but basically you've got a structure and you know what you're supposed to do. You're not sitting there all the time thinking, wow, I could have a better deal if I just did this. Or, wow, I don't think I really want to be married to this person anymore. You know, all of these questions that really haunt us, that are driving us crazy. Am I right? Do you know what I'm talking about? We can't commit. This is why people can't commit. There's nothing to commit to. Right? They don't know what the structure is that they're signing up for. So I just want to put out there as a way of thinking about what family law does, what marriage law does, is to just give you this framework. And then as long as you do these handful of things, you get to do anything you want. You know, if your wife does the dishes all the time, that's cool. If you do the dishes some of the time, that's cool too. Nobody cares, right? As long as you stay within the basic parameters. Okay. The next thing I want to point out is that the family is like the market in this way, in another way too. And that is that the family or marriage is a unit of social cooperation. It's a method for social cooperation. Now, David alluded to this, and I think Father Sirico alluded to it as well. I think Andy Sandlin alluded to this, that the market gives people a tool or a method of interacting with one another, of cooperating with each other, right? It's a way of getting things done with strangers. That's what the market allows you to do. And it's constructive, it's productive, right? So you can think of marriage and the family in a similar way. The cooperation between a mother and a father is the most basic unit of social cooperation you can imagine. I mean, just think about it, right? Mom and dad coming together for a project of mutual concern, right? That is a unit of social cooperation. It doesn't get any more basic than that. And so I think it's helpful to see the family as a unit of social cooperation because, again, it helps you kind of bridge this gap with some of your libertarian free market friends who the only thing they can think of, when they think social cooperation, the only thing they can think of is a contract. Well, contracts are swell. You know, I'm second to none in my admiration for contracts. It's fine. But it's not the only way that people can cooperate with one another in a voluntary way. So that's what that's another way of thinking about the family. And then finally, the last point, the eighth point of how to understand the family is I believe that the government has a duty to the family. The government has a positive duty to the family, and here's what it is. Think back, as I said earlier, a man and a woman come together, and through their sexual union, a child is born to them. What is owed to the three of them? What does the rest of society owe to them? I think they're owed something very simple, and it's not free housing or medical care. What they are owed is recognition, right? They are owed recognition. These two people are the father and mother of that child, and no one else is. No one else is. Those two people are the father and mother of that child. That's a duty of justice to both of those adults because it is their child. And it's a duty of justice to the child because the child can know that that's who they can turn to. That's who he or she can turn to know who they are and to turn to for their most basic sustenance and support. It's to their mother and father. First line of defense, your mom and dad are there to take care of you. And first line of knowing who you are is your mother and father. I am the child of these two people. Right? That you know who you are and you know who you can turn to for support. That, I believe, that the government has a duty in justice to those three people to recognize their relationship among one another. Okay? In Father Sirico's talk, he mentioned that government has a duty to recognize the right of private property. The right of private property does not come from government. It is a natural right inherent in the reality of things. Okay? And the same is true. The right to be a parent to the child that has come from the fruit of your sexual union, that is a natural right, okay? And that doesn't mean that everybody has a right to become a parent because, you know, maybe nobody will put up with you and you can't have a child because nobody will get involved with you, right? That doesn't mean that you have somehow been wronged, okay? Nobody owes you a partner. Nobody owes you a baby, right? Let's be clear about that. A lot of confusion about that. A lot of confusion about that, right? But once the baby's there, the two parents have a legitimate claim to say, we are the parents to this child and no one else is. And the government has a duty to recognize that. Now, I understand there are exceptional circumstances, adoption exists, and so on and so forth. But what does adoption do? Adoption exists for exceptional circumstances. It exists for the cases where the parents, for some reason, cannot take care of their child. And, by the way, adoption recognizes biology, doesn't it? Because the state recognizes that the biological parent have to give their consent before the baby's adopted, right? I mean, we accept, so biology matters, right? The institution of adoption itself recognizes that biology matters. It's a way of recognizing parental rights, in a sense. So that's what I think is a way of just thinking about, or sort of conceptualizing some of the many issues that trouble us about the family, and some of the things that that we need to have some clarity about. Because the truth of the matter is that as bad as things are going in the economic sphere, as much progress as the centralists and the statists and the Marxists, whatever you want to call those people, they're making so much progress in the economic sphere. That's very true, and it's very deadly. But it's also true that they have made tremendous progress on the social sphere as well, and they're doing tremendous harm in the social sphere as well. If you think about 40% out-of-wedlock childbearing, if you think about that, that is an unsustainable social reality. In a sense, it's the social equivalent of $15 trillion in debt, right? Because you can't go on like that, right? The deprivation that you're building in to your life by having children who don't have intact relationships with their parents, that's so expensive. You just can't imagine that can go on without some kind of collapse, right? But I don't want to leave you with no hope. I don't want to leave you with the idea that it's all doom and gloom. The fact is that people in this room and the young people that we deal with through the Ruth Institute, the fact is there are more people who hold our views than there are people who hold the really radical sexual liberationist views. The fact is most people agree with us about at least part of this agenda. Actually, very few people will go all the way down, all the points of the sexual revolution, and agree with every single one of them. Most people will at least, I have it happen to me all the time. I'll be on campus somewhere talking about same-sex marriage or something like that. So some student will come up to me and say, I don't agree with you about that, but what you said about single parents, it's true. My mom really struggled with me. My mom's a single mom, and I really struggled, and my mom really struggled. So I don't like that other thing you said, but you were really right about that. So there's reason, I think, to be hopeful. And one of the things we see with the college students that we work with is that the students who are religiously serious and who are in college, they are very deliberate. They are intentionally living chaste lives, which on today's college campuses really takes some doing, right? And so they're not just drifting in the cultural soup. So at the Ruth Institute, those are the kids we're interacting with all the time. And those are the kids that we believe if we support them and help them and equip them to be articulate spokespeople for the truth, that we really can make a difference. So we would invite all of you to be involved with us in that great work of building up the free society through building up the family. Thank you very much.
It's unbelievable.
Okay. So what do we do now?
We'll do a Q&A, so... Okay. I think Chris is going to get me another wireless.